At the start of the story, when he bent down to take a closer look, he was left stunned. Inside the sand he had casually scooped up from the river, he found a huge piece of gold the size of a loaf of bread. It was now clear that there were rich gold deposits hidden in this area. Overjoyed, he immediately started digging all around the place. He dug dozens of holes, but nothing else turned up. Just when he was about to give up, he made an even bigger discovery. The moment he cleared away the dirt, a bright golden shine reflected straight onto his face. At last, all his hard work had paid off. Tears filled his eyes with happiness, and he covered his mouth so he wouldn't accidentally shout with excitement. At the age of 70, he finally believed that the rest of his life could be spent in peace and comfort. He collected every piece of gold, grabbed his shotgun, and spent the entire night guarding it. He didn't sleep for even a single moment. The next morning, he set out toward a distant town with his loyal dog. His plan was simple. He wanted to sell the gold, earn a fortune, and spend the rest of his days living quietly in some peaceful place. But he had no idea that this very gold was about to drag him back onto a path filled with bloodshed. The man who had laid down his weapons years ago was about to stain his hands with blood once again. He hadn't even traveled 10 kilometers when he spotted a group of German Nazi soldiers on the road. These soldiers were retreating from Finland after losing the war. One of them immediately noticed the gold-panning pan hanging from Atami's horse. Soon their eyes landed on the bag filled with gold. Greed instantly appeared on their faces. They wanted every bit of it for themselves. Atami had no interest in picking a fight, but he wasn't afraid either. He simply signaled his dog to keep moving ahead. However, the Nazis deliberately fired at the dog. Fortunately, their aim was terrible, and the dog escaped unharmed. Seeing his loyal companion attacked filled Atami with both anger and pain. On the other hand, the Nazi soldiers acted with complete arrogance and disrespect. They had no idea who they had just challenged. The old man standing before them was more dangerous than death itself. He was a warrior who had walked through mountains of corpses and rivers of blood. Killing was nothing new to him. This was the beginning of a completely uneven but terrifying battle. The remaining soldiers pulled out their weapons and tried to kill Atami, but by then it was already too late. None of them could stand against him. Atami's speed, brutality, and fighting skills were so overwhelming that all their efforts became useless. Several soldiers didn't even get a chance to scream. One after another, they collapsed onto the ground, never to get back up again. After finishing them all, Atami calmly continued on his journey. Meanwhile, another group of Nazi soldiers arrived after hearing the gunfire. When they found the bodies of their comrades scattered everywhere, they immediately realized they were dealing with someone extremely dangerous. This time, they chased after him with a tank. First, they fired the tank cannon. When that failed, they opened up with heavy machine guns, spraying bullets as if they had an endless supply. Atami pushed his horse to its limit and disappeared from their sight. He was an experienced war veteran, but even he had never faced such terrifying firepower before. He gently calmed his frightened horse, unaware that he had entered an area filled with landmines planted earlier by the Nazis. Sometime later, when he regained consciousness, he saw that his horse had been blown apart in an explosion. Its body was so badly destroyed that it was almost impossible to recognize. Before he could even mourn the loss of his companion, the Nazi soldiers arrived once again. Pieces of gold were scattered all over the ground. Without caring about his own life, Atami dropped to his knees and began gathering every piece. The Nazi major sitting on the tank noticed the shining gold, and greed immediately filled his eyes. He ordered his men to kill Atami and seize all the gold, but he had no idea that Atami had secretly picked up a rock. The instant a soldier pulled the trigger, Atami threw the rock with all his strength onto a nearby landmine. A massive explosion shook the entire area. The major was shocked. He couldn't believe that this ordinary-looking old man could be so deadly. Deciding not to take any more chances, he ordered all of his soldiers to fire at the same time. Atami used his metal gold-panning pan like a shield, trying to protect himself from the storm of bullets. After nearly a minute of non-stop gunfire, the major climbed down from the tank to inspect the situation. Even though his own army had planted the landmines, he still didn't dare move forward. Instead, he ordered one soldier to go first. The terrified soldier was shaking with fear, but he had no choice except to obey. Moments later, another explosion echoed across the field. The major then sent 2 more soldiers forward. By the time the smoke cleared, Atami had already disappeared. Furious beyond control, the major became so cruel that he forced the women he had captured to walk in front of the tank so they could trigger and reveal the hidden landmines. Those women had already suffered unimaginable cruelty at the hands of the Nazi soldiers. Meanwhile, the women were barely able to walk. Their bodies were completely broken after everything they had suffered, but the anger in their eyes and their tightly clenched fists showed their silent rebellion. Around the same time, the Nazis found Atami's military identification tag buried in the dirt. The radio operator immediately informed his general and requested Atami's military records. They soon learned that he had once been Finland's most dangerous special forces soldier. He had killed more than 300 Russian soldiers all by himself. His combat skills were so extraordinary that one man was considered equal to an entire suicide squad. People called him the Immortal Man, the one who could never be killed. The major only laughed after hearing this. He believed it was nothing more than a legend. In reality, the only thing that mattered to him was the gold. He already knew Germany had lost the war. If he returned home, he would most likely face punishment or even execution. But if he could get his hands on the gold, he believed he might be able to start a new life. Meanwhile, Atami had already covered several dozen kilometers on foot. His body was completely exhausted, so he found a safe place to rest. During the previous battle, several bullets had struck his arm and thigh. If the wounds weren't treated, an infection could easily kill him. First, he packed the wounds with dirt to stop the bleeding. Then, he removed his belt and tied it tightly around his thigh. Without the slightest hesitation, he pulled out his knife and dug the bullets out of his own body. The pain was so unbearable that he eventually passed out. After quite some time, his loyal dog finally found him. It ran toward its owner with all its strength. Seeing Atami's condition, the dog cried in sorrow. It couldn't treat his wounds, but it could stay beside him and guard him. At the same time, the Nazi soldiers had once again reached his location. As soon as the dog sensed danger, it started barking loudly. Hearing the barking, Atami woke up immediately. He realized the danger and tried to hide, but there was no longer enough time to escape. The biggest problem was that the Nazis had brought 2 trained police dogs with them. They could easily track him by his scent. To stay alive, Atami made an incredibly bold and almost insane decision. He quietly crawled underneath one of the Nazi vehicles and clung to its underside. Then he pulled out his knife and punctured the fuel tank. Gasoline began dripping continuously. His plan was simple. The strong smell of fuel would hide his own scent, so the police dogs wouldn't be able to track him. A short while later, one of the soldiers noticed the leaking fuel. He immediately stopped the vehicle and ordered it to be inspected. Atami remained completely still beneath the vehicle. He didn't even breathe, afraid that the slightest sound would expose him. Once the soldier finished checking and walked away, Atami quietly crawled out and ran toward the river. This time, however, the Nazis spotted him. They immediately opened fire and one bullet struck his calf. Even with the pain, he kept running. The Nazi major didn't want Atami to die so easily. He released his hunting dogs, hoping they would catch him alive so he could torture him, but there wasn't the slightest fear in Atami's eyes. Carrying his bag of gold, he jumped straight into the river. The gold was so heavy that it immediately pulled him beneath the surface. That was exactly what he wanted. If he had stayed above the water, the bullets would have torn him apart. Standing on the riverbank, the Nazis were certain he was dead. They kept aiming their guns at the water and waited. Half an hour passed, yet nothing happened. Slowly, the river began turning red. Seeing the blood, the major concluded that the old man had finally died. He immediately ordered his soldiers to take a raft and recover the gold. The first soldier climbed into the water. He had no idea that Atami was still alive, hiding beneath the surface. The moment the soldier reached him, Atami slit his throat. Then he moved close to the dying man and breathed in the air escaping from his lungs to get fresh oxygen. Moments later, the water turned red once again. A second soldier went into the river. Just a few seconds later, his blood also spread through the water. The third soldier saw what had happened and became terrified. He didn't dare enter the river and quickly escaped with the raft. Now the Nazis finally realized that Atami was still alive. They once again unleashed a storm of bullets with their machine guns. Atami used the dead soldier's body as a shield and, relying on his unbelievable physical strength, managed to cross the river and escape. The major could do nothing except watch as Atami disappeared on the opposite bank. A fortune worth millions was slipping away right in front of his eyes. Just then, Atami's loyal dog appeared while searching for its owner. The moment the major saw the dog, a cruel and dangerous idea came to his mind. After surviving countless hardships, Atami finally reached the place where he had once lived, but the sight completely shattered his heart. The entire town had been destroyed by the war. The houses, roads, and buildings had all been reduced to ashes. He didn't stay there for long and continued moving forward. As night fell, he found an abandoned gas station and decided to rest there. The wound on his leg was still bleeding and his body was completely exhausted. Before long, he fell into a deep sleep. While sleeping, he suddenly sensed some strange movement nearby. He instantly became alert and was about to get up when his loyal dog came running toward him. He was overjoyed to see his companion alive, but he had no idea that an even greater shock was waiting for him. As soon as he fully opened his eyes, he realized a noose had already been placed around his neck. Both of his hands had been tied tightly. A few moments later, later, he was hanging from the gallows. When his body became completely still and it appeared that his breathing had stopped, the Nazi major walked over to him. As a fellow soldier, he removed his hat and lowered his head in respect. They truly admired the courage of this Finnish warrior. The Nazis believed everything was finally over. They had the gold, Atami was dead, and this terrifying old soldier would never return. But they had no idea that the real nightmare was only beginning. Atami had only pretended to die. While hanging from the noose, he searched for anything that could support his body weight and allow him to breathe. He noticed a broken metal spike sticking out nearby, but it wasn't enough. In the end, he made a horrifying decision. He forced his already injured leg onto a protruding iron rod. The pain was unbearable, but it gave him just enough support to stay alive and keep breathing. Below him, his loyal dog never left his side. Just then, a German warplane flew in at a very low altitude and landed nearby. The heavy vibration loosened the bolts of the gallows, and Atami fell to the ground. Although he had survived, both pilots saw him. They thought the man who had survived hanging would finally die at their hands. But everything changed in the very next moment. Atami attacked with lightning speed, killing one pilot instantly and knocking the other unconscious. After that, he sat quietly on the ground for a while, lost in thought. The truth was, even without the gold, he could have somehow lived the rest of his life in peace. But then, he remembered his destroyed home. He remembered his wife and children. He remembered his comrades who had died in the war and were buried beneath the frozen ground. His anger returned once again. He decided he would never let these monsters go. He realized there was only one way to deal with people like them. He had to become even more ruthless, even more fearless, and even more dangerous than they were. He swore that he would not only survive, but also take back his gold. Without wasting any time, he treated his wounds. He picked up a can of gasoline and used it to clean them. The surviving pilot trembled with fear after seeing this. He understood that the man standing before him was no ordinary human. Atami then forced the pilot to fly the plane and take him straight to the Nazis. Meanwhile, the Nazi soldiers came across a strange sight on the road. Their own aircraft had crashed and was blocking their path. As they carefully approached and looked inside, they found the pilot dead, but something else made their blood run cold. The dead pilot had the exact same rope tied around his neck that had been used to hang Atami the previous night. The major's face instantly turned pale. He finally realized that the old man had returned. Only now did he truly understand who they had made an enemy of. This was a man who couldn't be killed, couldn't be defeated, and couldn't be frightened. He was chasing them like death itself. Even though they still had superior numbers and weapons, the major immediately ordered a retreat. For the first time, he felt real fear, but it was already too late. Atami secretly handed weapons to all the women the Nazis had been holding captive. Those women carried years of pain, humiliation, and burning hatred inside their hearts. The soldiers marching ahead had no idea what was about to happen. Suddenly, Atami's knife flew straight into the truck driver's head. The women pulled back the truck's cover and opened fire with everything they had. Burning with revenge, they attacked the Nazi soldiers from every direction. Within moments, many of them were lying dead. Watching everything from inside the tank, the major completely broke down. His courage was gone. The only thing left for him was to run. He ordered the driver to move the tank at full speed. What he didn't know was that Atami was already hiding on top of the tank in a place where the soldiers inside couldn't see him. He grabbed an iron rod and repeatedly slammed it against the tank's roof. The three soldiers inside immediately heard the noise. To shake Atami off, the driver suddenly slammed on the brakes. The powerful jolt threw Atami off the tank. The soldiers instantly opened fire on him, but either through luck or their terrible aim, not a single bullet hit him. The tank continued moving, and Atami began chasing it from behind. Meanwhile, the frightened soldiers searched for him in every direction. Suddenly, Atami appeared beside one of them and shattered his arm with a single strike. Both of them fell from the tank and rolled across the ground. Watching through his binoculars, the major saw Atami slowly get back on his feet despite all his injuries. The major had always been selfish and cruel. He didn't care about the lives of his own men. He abandoned the wounded soldier and continued racing toward the designated meeting point. The injured soldier had been beaten badly. He fell to his knees and begged Atami to spare his life. He promised that if he was forgiven, he would change and make up for his mistakes. Just then, two more Nazi soldiers arrived on a motorcycle, but the moment they looked into Atami's eyes, they froze with fear. His eyes held such terrifying determination and rage that it felt as if death itself was standing before them. Without wasting a second, both soldiers threw down their weapons and ran away. Atami immediately got on one of the motorcycles and went after the remaining enemy. As for the soldier who had been begging for mercy on his knees, someone else settled his fate later. Sometime later, the major reached the planned meeting point. To hide his crimes and make sure no one discovered his escape plan, he even killed the tank crew that had accompanied him. He believed his plan had finally succeeded. He was convinced he would escape safely with the gold, but he had no idea that death was still chasing him. Atami sped toward him on the motorcycle. Just as the airplane began taking off, the Major witnessed a sight he would never forget. Atami was running directly toward the aircraft with a submachine gun in his hands, firing non-stop. When he ran out of bullets, he threw the gun away, grabbed a heavy iron tool, and sprinted toward the plane with all his strength. The Major and the pilot believed they had escaped. They had no idea that Atami had done the impossible. Using the iron tool, he hooked himself onto the underside of the aircraft and was now hanging beneath the plane as it flew through the sky. The pilot had already been wounded. A bullet had struck his arm, and he could barely control the aircraft. The Major was completely focused on saving himself. A short time later, Atami smashed through the aircraft's outer body with his tool and climbed inside. The final battle had begun. The two men now stood face to face. After fighting continuously for several days, Atami's body was completely exhausted. At the beginning of the fight, the stronger Major gained the upper hand, but Atami refused to give up. His eyes still carried the same deadly determination. The Major repeatedly attacked him with a steel hook. Atami's body was torn open in several places. He was covered in blood and was on the verge of death. Just as the Major was about to deliver the final blow, Atami suddenly grabbed the hook with all his strength. In one quick move, he jammed it into the tail section of one of the bombs inside the aircraft. The mechanism activated instantly. The Major was violently pulled out of the aircraft. At last, he received the punishment for all his greed, cruelty, and countless crimes. But the danger was not over yet. The pilot had already died. The airplane was completely out of control and was crashing rapidly toward the ground. The first thing Atami did was recover his gold. After that, he searched the entire aircraft for a parachute, but there wasn't one. Now the situation seemed impossible. If he jumped from the aircraft, he would certainly die. In the final moments, he made one last daring decision. Using straps, he tied himself securely to the rear section of the airplane. A few moments later, the aircraft crashed. Yet unbelievably, Atami survived. He had landed in a swamp, and the thick mud had saved his life. Sometime later, he rode into the city on a motorcycle with his loyal dog. At last, he reached the bank. His entire body was covered in mud. He looked more like a homeless man than someone carrying a fortune. People quickly stepped aside as he walked past them. He calmly approached the bank counter, placed all of his gold on the desk, and the employees could only stare at him in complete shock. In a calm voice, Atami said that he wanted all of the gold exchanged into large denomination banknotes so they would be easier to carry. Atami was so fearless, unshakable, and almost impossible to defeat because the famous Finnish spirit of Sisu flowed through his veins. It is the spirit that refuses to let a person break, even in the hardest situations. Endless patience, unbreakable courage, the ability to endure pain, and the determination to never give up are what define Sisu. And it was this very spirit that turned one old man into a walking nightmare for the entire Nazi army. The movie ends here. Thank you.